Thanks very much, Rene. Such generous introduction. My name's Nikolas Badminton. I'm English, but I'm also Canadian. I'm based up here in Toronto, in Ontario. I've been speaking about agriculture for a very long period of time now, and I'm a futurist. And what does a futurist do? Well, I help my clients look out 5, 10, 20 plus years into our futures, so we can do that better strategic planning and start to look for unforeseen risks. But my background is actually based in an agricultural community. I grew up in Somerset in the southwest UK in a village called Martock. My father used to manage the slaughterhouse. And then when he moved on from that, he worked in the dairy industry for 30 years. I very briefly worked in the dairy industry until my parents realized that I was actually quite talented at using the computer. So I went back to university, went to and studied artificial intelligence, linguistics, organizational change. I spent over 28 years out in the world building massive analytical artificial intelligence and data space systems. Last 10 years, I've been focused on futures design. And where did that spark of inspiration to get into that area come from? Well, it came from when I was just a very young boy. I said I was very good at computers. I picked up the computer around about the age of 8 or 10, about the same time as I picked up this book. This is the Osborne Book of the Future. And this book was given to me by my father. And it was a vision of the world in 2000 and beyond. And we haven't quite hit the mark of what they were saying there, living on the moon, farming under the sea, robots in the homes and whatever. But it really sparked my interest as to what could happen in the world. And when I got back into futures design as a focus, it was interesting to me that I'd always been tracking those futures. And as a futurist, I work with some of the largest companies in the world to really wonder, how the world is changing. But what I do more than anything else is work with executives and people like you online to really challenge our collective poverty of imagination. Now, this is a situation we found ourselves in because we're so busy, we're so focused on what we're doing every single day that we forget to sort of sit back and just be curious and explore and daydream about what could be. So I try and reignite imagination and try and motivate people to explore what our futures could be on a daily basis. And the poverty of imagination can be overcome. But within the futurist think tank that I run and the work that I do, there are sort of 4 main elements to the work that I undertake. I scan for signals and I try and identify trends. This keynote today is going to uncover a number of signals and trend areas for us to explore together. And then I help build out scenarios. So we might look to the year 2040 and ask, what if the world was different? And then I like to take it even further and write speculative fiction, make short films. And once we can really see these raw, visceral, creative explorations, we can be inspired to think, okay, if we can see what might happen, then how can we be different today in how we operate to create a pathway forward to that particular activity? So just to clarify what I do, we don't predict, we speculate as futurists. A lot of people say, 10 predictions of this and that. That's not what this is about. I speculate. I sort of wonder if these things are going to catch fire and change the world. I explore. This isn't about strategy. This presentation isn't about, taking this verbatim and going out and suddenly creating a whole future farm concept. But this is about discipline around research and not hyperbole. There's a lot of noise out there and hype about what the future may bring. I try and temper that with some really standard thinking about what we actually need and what's really important in the world. And most importantly, what I do is I help executives, and hopefully I'll help you online today, shift your mindset from what we're wondering about today, the next 3 to 5 years, to what if. What might happen in the next sort of 10, 20, 30, even 50 plus years, and what we can do about that as well. So what I like to do is really ground us in thinking about how we got to today. And the one thing that's very clear is that we're stuck in this industrial complex. The industrial complex started some sort of 270, 280 years ago across 3 different dimensions: information, transportation, and energy. And at that time, in the first industrial revolution, we saw huge amounts of innovation and the establishment of factories and transportation through trains, printing presses that were automatically running, and the such like. And where we find ourselves today is an evolution of that. But instead, we've got faster information than ever before, and data growth is incredible. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We've got electrified infrastructure, hopefully powered by renewable energy going forward. We're also going to touch in on that. And we've got transportation that's going faster than ever before, everything from autonomous vehicles to suborbital launches. So it's an exciting time, but these three dimensions are the dimensions that we still look at. And what's common in the fourth industrial revolution, as we call it, is that it's got a backbone of interconnectedness, the internet and the connectivity and sensors and data, artificial intelligence and beyond. So this presentation, as I said, we're going to look about the signals of change and a number of different trend areas. And to really ground us in what's happening in the world, I like to look at some global megatrends. So if we look outside of North America into what's happening, we can see some really interesting things that are going to decide how the world is going to operate in the next sort of 20 to 50 years. So by 2030, they're saying that China is going to be the #1 economy in the world, closely followed by India, with the United States in number 3. It's sort of a changing of the guard, with the United States at #1 today. And we're already starting to see some of those dynamics play out in the news with the conflict in Ukraine and whatever. And this is going to be really interesting to see with such large populations within both China and India, and how their diaspora spreads around the world. It's really interesting to see the dynamics of how this is going to play out. But population growth is not in any of those three places if we look forward. It's going to be in Africa. African population is exploding. The median age in Africa is 18 years old. And we've got a huge amount of cities that are growing, and a lot of innovation and a lot of very smart people building businesses that are truly going to change our world. The African continent has been a point of contention for hundreds of years. And now I think it's the time for the leaders to stand up and shine, and for us to work with them as well. But what's really interesting to think about Africa, also growth in Southeast Asia, is, the growth of megacities around the world. And this is going to sort of change the dynamics of food production and supply. If we actually look here, by 2100, and this is based on some modeling from the United Nations and the University of Toronto here in Canada, we're seeing huge explosive growth in Africa and Southeast Asia. In fact, they think that Lagos, Nigeria, is going to be about 55 million people by 2050. It's going to be 88 million people by 2100. So think about the dynamics of feeding that population, and think about the dynamics of what needs to happen in that city for it to operate in a good way. But then we've got this sort of other side of the megatrends beyond population growth to climate warming. The IPCC just released its new report. Now, if we actually look at where we need to be, we need to really be limiting our global warming to 1.5 degrees. That's the lower left blue line. We're not even going to hit that. Our implemented policies today, the Paris Agreement and such like, we're going to be warming much more than we really should do. So there's some action, there's some hard decisions, regulations, changing of how the industries around the world, including agriculture, actually works. And this is going to be a really tough time. We're going to see more extreme weather events. We're going to see hotter winters, hotter summers, and we're going to see some very strange behaviors. I don't talk about specifics in terms of climate and weather, but I talk about these trends, because if we start to see this warming over time, we know that our industry and agriculture is going to be affected. What's also going to be affected as well is drought and water supply and water scarcity. If you look around the world, we've got a huge amount of water scarcity that's happening. For example, I was just down in California about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and they've got the largest drought they think they've had for the last 12 centuries across the equator, the Middle East and Africa. There's going to be a lot of challenges with water, and even up here in Canada as well. Even though we've got 21% of the world's fresh water, there's still a lot of communities that struggle. There's still a lot of drought. There's still a lot of problems. So water is something that I focus a lot on. And there's something that we really need to consider is the water, energy, food nexus as well. With a scarcity of water, there's going to be affected food supply. So a 35% reduction in yields of global vegetable and legume production by 2100 due to water scarcity, increased salinity, and ozone. And also a 40% shortfall of available water across the globe by 2030, with an effect on 98% of electric power generation. So when we start to think about this water, energy, food nexus, we start to see some serious challenges that we can be a part of the community that comes together and tries to resolve some of these. Okay, so moving on from the mega trends, the next thing that I talk about is around energy investment. Energy is so exciting to me. We've been locked into this industrial complex with fossil fuels as the backbone for so long that it's very, very difficult to get out of it. But there's a huge amount of hope. And really, we have to invest our way out of that. There's some speculations from people like Carl Burkhart from Stanford that says, okay, if we can get together as 139, 140 different countries around the world, start making good decisions about regulations and policy and investment together, we can wean ourselves off very quickly from our reliance on fossil fuels towards renewable energy sources, wind, solar, rooftop photovoltaics, which is interesting because of the decentralized nature of that, hydro, also geothermal as well. Someone was talking about Iceland in the chat earlier, and I went to Iceland and saw a tomato farm that was purely run from geothermal energy for both its electricity production and also the warming of the greenhouses. It's hugely fascinating to me. But what's really interesting is that we can invest to shift ourselves towards renewable energy production in the world and suddenly find ourselves with the majority of energy produced that way in a clean sense. And they actually find that $1.8 trillion of investment could deliver over $7 trillion of benefit. It's actually been proven it's cheaper to run renewable energy infrastructure than it is to run fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. One particular great example of this working in recent years has been the Hornsdale wind farm down in southern Australia. They're having troubles providing consistent energy down there. And Elon Musk and Tesla and the CEO of Tesla Solar stepped up and said, okay, we can help you implement a battery farm, one of the biggest battery farms in the world, where we can store that energy and we can implement that in less than 100 days. What was interesting was this sales pitch happened on Twitter and it was implemented. Elon Musk mobilized his teams. They delivered this in 85 days. And they think that it's paid off its initial investment around 90 million Australian dollars in about 3 years. So it's interesting to see this as one particular example of how renewable energy can be delivered, can provide consistent energy and work together batteries with the power solutions like wind. But if we look at agriculture, there's been a trend of farmers, leasing their land to energy companies to put solar panels on them. But I got thinking about, there's going to be something where we can actually still grow food and we can still generate power. And this is one example from Germany of agrovoltaics, where they actually suspend solar panels over the top of crops that can actually thrive in the shade. So it's interesting when we start to see this mashup of different technologies that sort of indicate to me that our futures are going to be slightly different. And then back on the farm, what do we do with all the food waste and whatever? Well, we can actually put that in anaerobic digesters and use that to generate methane. They can be used to generate power. And these farmers can then sell that power back into the grid, and that can be a revenue source as well as powering their farm as well. It's hugely exciting. I think energy is going to be one of those sort of income streams for farming operations going forward. And with all this electricity and opportunity, we've got the opportunity to think about electrified operations. So you got the Fendt eVario tractor that's fully electric. And whilst today it doesn't have the range or the amount of hours that we need in the fields, it's still good for a lot of usage around the farms. We've got the Tesla Semi down in China. They've got these large container ships that run up and down the Yangtze about 40 miles on a daily basis. Takes about 4 hours to offload them and 4 hours to charge them. So it works really well. Ironically, they take coal up the Yangtze, so maybe they need to do some shifts. But in the cities as well, we're seeing a huge amount of electrification. And what we're seeing in China right now, every sort of 6 to 8 weeks, they're deploying about 5,000 or 6,000 electric buses to the new very large cities in China. So we're going to see an overarching shift in the vehicles that you drive for personal use. I drive an electric vehicle all the way through to farming operations, logistics, and such like. But what's really interesting is what's coming down the line. We've already got the internet. We're already used to being able to connect to people all over the world. But what if we could do that with renewable energy hubs as well? So if we create renewable energy hubs and we can create, cross-border transmission and transmission and trading of energy in real time, then we can get ourselves to a point where renewable energy can actually be reduced down in price. And literally, we're going to be paying for the delivery of that energy rather than the production of it. This is a global supergrid. And this is an idea of how the world could be around about 2050, 2060. It's already happening in Asia across 5 different countries. It's already happening across the North Sea. There are challenges in North America with the national grid. A lot of this needs to be resolved. So do watch that space, certainly. But what if? What if we electrify operations? What if we consider energy flow agreements and making money from the energy we produce through agricultural operations? What if we decentralize renewables so that we don't have to draw any energy off the grid? And what if there is that global supergrid? Okay, let's move on into data and algorithms and the growth. We know that data is the lifeblood of every organization in the world. The largest companies in the world are worth trillions of dollars, and data is their currency. But I look at traditional data models and I start to wonder, okay, if we gather data, we turn that into information, and then we use our skills to turn that into knowledge, and we use our collective wisdom to really accelerate the industry and our operations going forward, we can do some really great things. There's been a lot of work around using this for real world decision making, but also streamlining it using technology. Over time, data is going to be more prevalent. Over 175 zettabytes of data are going to be created each year, which is like a huge growth of about 61% year on year. And right now, we're not quite at that level, but there's going to be more data than ever, and we're going to need to tap into that. If you just look at farms alone, we're going to be seeing over 4 million digital data points collected each day by farmers by 2035. So that's going to be from sensors in the field. It's going to be from the systems that we use. And we're going to be able to get huge competitive advantage and also provide wisdom to the community at large. But really to untap that knowledge within there, what we have to do is use something beyond human guile and the ability to go through reams of spreadsheets. We have to use artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of conversation about how this is going to change the world, but really it's going to change every single industry. It's going to reshape transportation, health, science, finance, and the military. It's certainly going to change how agriculture works as well. And I show this. This is a video from Tesla.com. And this is sort of the purest form of what I think artificial intelligence can do in the modern days. It's full self-driving. This isn't working 100% in every scenario around the world, so there's still some work to be done. But think about this. Something that drives around with sensors that can drive itself, it's self-aware, it collects data that can be used in other applications. This is kind of the holy grail. We're still a few years away from this being perfect. And if you think about this, if you're like 17, 18 years old, you jump in a car, you learn to drive, and then you're let out on your own. You're more effective than artificial intelligence. Like humans are the most effective sensory systems and data crunching systems in the world. But imagine if you put humans together with this kind of technology. It's very exciting to me. In fact, it's exciting to a lot of people around the world when they're thinking about economic growth. They actually think that there's going to be about a $15.7 trillion boost to the global economy by 2030 because we've got some productivity and consumption side effects. We've got the ability to tap into data, to be able to find new ways of working, be able to do sort of algorithmic prediction as well. And we're sort of starting to see this within the context of the farm and what I call like swarm farming. So yeah, we're going to have fully automated tractors. We're going to have some of them being electrified. We're going to have small robotics. We're going to have the ability to use robotics for very niche applications, like being able to apply fertilizer very specifically to plants that need them the most, by being able to do weeding as well. But what's interesting is that there's lots of fantastic ideas about what these kind of robotics can be. I showed this at a conference down in California. There's like apple picking robots and drones and whatever. This is something that is so new and it's playful. I think of this as a speculative future, but this is a company out of Israel that's very well funded, that's thinking this is the future of being able to pick apples in the orchards. I think there's a lot of problems here, but we're still very reliant on human resources. And sometimes, and certainly what we saw during the pandemic, being reliant on human resources, we can have some challenges with that. So it's kind of interesting to think about, okay, hundreds of these robotic systems in swarms could be really interesting as a development. Then what if we put sensors in the fields, use platforms like this from CropX, and we can do, sensing the soil, weather, aerial imaging, and the such like. It's about putting the data in the hands of the farmer and being really powerful in the application of that as well. There's another really interesting thing that's happening is the use of augmented reality and being able to overlay data as we look through the viewfinders or headsets as we look forward in the world. But this is kind of being played with a lot. You've probably heard of the phrase the metaverse right now. It's a rebranding of the internet, but this is kind of part of that story, which is practical use cases around looking at the health of your crops through wayfinders with the data that's collected from sensors. It's kind of exciting times for me. And this is going to gain pace and it's going to become practical and it's going to be deployed at scale. Again, it's hard to do hardware development, but Meta, formerly Facebook, has got a project called Project Aria. So imagine if you could wear a normal set of glasses out in the fields or in whatever agricultural operations you're in. You can just ask for some information to be overlaid, and suddenly you've got something useful to look at. There's a designer out of the UK called Keiichi Matsuda that sort of warns us of what this world could look like, as well as what it could deliver for us. Here's a very short clip of his video called Hyper Reality. And Hyper Reality is a much longer video, and do go and watch this after this. But like, what happens if we're inundated with data provided from useful perspectives, but also advertising perspectives as well?
Estoy presente ahora. Me amo. Estoy libre de mi ira. Estoy libre de mi tristeza. El amor es mi tristeza.
Habla español, niña. Adiós. Hola, me llamo María.
Bueno. Hola otra vez.
It's interesting, a fully gamified world. It's like having New York Times Square strapped to your face. And we kind of want to avoid that, but it can be really, really useful to collect that data, to be able to visualize it. And another way that you could visualize things is through digital triplets and simulations. So we could simulate all of our operations, test out new solutions in software virtually before we head out into the fields and do it for practical uses. It's interesting how data, artificial intelligence, sensors, augmented reality can all come together and change how we do farming. And in fact, this is what's going to be really interesting. From an artificial intelligence perspective, hopefully we'll remove that sort of drudge work that we do currently as humans in collecting data and processing that into information. And we can liberate ourselves as we manage operations to focus in on the knowledge and the wisdom of our operations. I kind of call this the wisdom economy. It's going to be an exciting time as we move forward in the world. So what if we suddenly find a world with autonomous swarm farming, sensors and network capabilities, data ownership? Why don't we take that back rather than just signing away all of our data to these large platforms, and simulation? It could give us a huge advantage in our operations and as a community as a whole, if we can share that information with each other. Another thing that's interesting, and earlier on I spoke about megacity growth, and I do think that we have to consider the food supply for urban ecosystems is this area of how we can provide, very close to home supply of food. So the indoor agri-tech landscape, vertical farming is absolutely booming. There's hundreds of companies out there really revolutionizing the way that we can look at doing vertical farming. In fact, the industry is sort of booming right now. In 2020, there's nearly $1 billion raised for US indoor farming ventures. That's just the US. And the industry is expecting this whole area to grow 25% year on year. It's interesting. There's not been a huge amount of success with vertical farming at scale across the United States and other parts of the world, but it's going to get there. This is going to be a prevalent trend, and it's something that I'm watching very closely. And then you're going to have artificially intelligent systems using sensors and cameras and robots to help keep those environments clean and to monitor them and run them 24/7, 365. You're going to have companies like Square Roots, which is run by Kimball Musk, which is Elon Musk's brother, which helps entrepreneurs in urban centers use things like shipping containers to do new agricultural operations. They're now providing a huge amount of food to supermarkets around the United States in urban centers. You've got companies out of Canada like Green Forges, which is out of Quebec, which is not too far from where I live, that's actually saying, okay, what if we actually like dig down and we have the vertical farms underground? So Green Forges is coming up with this new technology, lots of benefits of using the temperature underground as well in terms of keeping these environments very pure for growing food. And also, within an educational perspective, there are interesting companies like FarmPod, and this company starts to look at aquaculture, so being able to raise fish using the waste from them to help grow vegetables, and using the waste from that to be able to feed the fish, and to use solar and these cyclical systems. These actually have been sold to a lot of universities around the world. It's really interesting. But what's also interesting is being able to provide good, healthy food with high nutritional value to people in the inner cities as well. This is a shot from D-Town Farms, and there's a lot of people that are now have access to really good food. There's a lot of people below the poverty line in America, and a lot of those people do their weekly shop at dollar stores. We need to disrupt that signal, and we need to start to really put some faith behind these systems, and also systems like the Love Fridge in places like Chicago, where we can have communities that are really addressing the waste of food, the food that we can't eat on a daily basis, where we can just put that in boxes, Tupperware boxes. We can put that in these fridges. We can have some dry food there as well. And people in dozens of communities around places like Chicago can have access to food, whereas they might not be able to have access before. It's an interesting world that we're living in. So what if we see more big tech investments and they start to really go into cities? What if we start to see independent food supply in an urban context? What about those close to home logistics? How does that change the dynamics of having access to food? And how do we really put investment and power behind some of these grassroots movements to be able to feed people well? Okay, so moving on from urban environments, which I think are very exciting. I live in a very large urban environment here in Toronto, and I certainly track things here as well, into a world of novel nutrition, new ways of feeding us, and rethinking what food actually is. If we look at what young people think about food, there's been a shift in opinion, and it's been partly accelerated by the pandemic. People are focused on health and wellness. They do want convenience, and they want to have access to food through technology, rideshare apps, and whatever. Alternative proteins are hugely interesting to people, sustainable waste reduction, new flavors and experiences. New is something that's always defined what the agri-food industry can deliver in terms of excitement and inspiration, and I don't think that changes. What's interesting is there's been a shift, and there continues to be a shift to more plant-based diets. We're seeing a huge growth of 10% per year compound annual growth rate to 31.4 billion global vegan market size by 2026. And we're going to see more things happen. Now, this is what I call pure disruption. 3 years ago, I was in California. I was in San Mateo. I went to a supermarket with my great friend who also works in futures design. And I went to the meat aisle. And there it is, Beyond Beef, which is not meat, sat in the middle of the meat aisle. This is where disruption is. It certainly irks the beef, chicken, pork, and fish industry as well. But what we're starting to see is that people are very accepting that this is sort of a new kind of protein. And when you see companies like Nestle investing a huge amount of money in new products like Vrimp, which is like shrimp protein, but not actually shrimp, things are getting interesting to me. And that increase in protein, and we're always going to want protein in the world, is going to grow by 73% by 2050. And they think that the meat market, and actually the overall protein market, if we refocus it to those words, it's going to be worth $7.3 trillion. So there's going to be a lot of people out there that are starting to say, okay, we need part of this game, and we want to disrupt the incumbent players that are out there, raising animals and producing protein. And this is where it gets super interesting to me. On the left here, we've got a chicken called Ian, and this is one of my favorite stories from modern agriculture. He works for a company called Just. Now, Ian is retired, and Just took some of the cells from Ian to produce the chicken that they supply to consumers. And it's interesting when we start to see this. You don't have to slaughter a chicken to produce a chicken breast. This is an idea that was actually purported by Winston Churchill in 1931. And so it's been around for a very long time. And now that imagination and curiosity has led to this kind of reality. In fact, if you think about it, growing protein in bioreactors from starter cells is going to be quicker. So if you were to raise a cow 2 to 3 years, if you were going to produce the same amount of protein as you would do from that cow after 2 to 3 years, it's going to be weeks. So this is where disruption comes. And certainly it's going to be a different scale of what's happening in terms of animal rearing today. But it's going to get super interesting when we start to see this cellular-based protein and cellular-based agriculture as well. But it's not just food for consumption by us as adults, also using this protein production from starter cells to be able to produce mother's milk for babies, which is there's a huge deficit in the mother's milk that's actually out there. So there's some really interesting applications. And as a futurist, and I really encourage you to go out there and scan for these signals. There's lots of things that are related that sort of start to come back to play in the agriculture industry. But I think that we're going to end up in a world where we've got a kind of a Coca-Colaization of protein supply. Now, what does that mean? Well, Coca-Cola doesn't send cans or bottles of its product into places like McDonald's. They just send the syrup. So what we're going to have is agricultural producers providing specialist starter cells from like pigs and chicken and fish and whatever, and sending them out maybe to community hubs or factories that are decentralized across North America and beyond. Is kind of interesting. So what if, livestock rearing changes? Maybe there's a specialist market for those $1 million cows that provide the best cells for growing high quality protein. What if there's decentralized cellular protein supply? What if we can provide affordable protein for lower income communities, war zones, and even areas of famine? It gets really interesting when we start to step out of what we need to do in the agriculture industry into some of these more extreme situations. Okay, I've already touched a little bit about some of the thoughts of younger consumers, but I want to go a little bit further because I think that the agri-food industry and the restaurant industry is going to be disrupted quite heavily as well. If you go back to urban centers, I was in San Francisco a few weeks ago, and there were about 3 or 4 of these Amazon Go stores. You can go into these stores and you can go in and take what you want without actually having to see anyone within the store. Let's take a look at how this technology works and discuss a little bit the implications of this.
4 years ago, we started to wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store, grab what you want, and just go? What if we could weave the most advanced machine learning, computer vision, and AI into the very fabric of a store so you never have to wait in line? No lines, no checkouts, no registers. Welcome to Amazon Go. Use the Amazon Go app to enter. Then put away your phone and start shopping. It's really that simple. Take whatever you like. Anything you pick up is automatically added to your virtual cart. If you change your mind about that cupcake, just put it back. Our technology will update your virtual cart automatically. So, how does it work? We used computer vision, deep learning algorithms, and sensor fusion, much like you'd find in self-driving cars. We call it Just Walk Out technology. Once you've got everything you want, you can just go. When you leave, our Just Walk Out technology adds up your virtual cart and charges your Amazon account. Your receipt is sent straight to the app, and you can keep going. Amazon Go. No lines, no checkout. No, seriously.
So this changes the dynamics of buying food, the dynamics of going in, filling up our cart, considering what we've got, maybe putting some things back, is going to be changed forever by technology like this. If you go and read some research by a guy called Daniel Kahneman on fast and slow thinking, he talks about reflexive and reflective ways of thinking. Reflexive is, I want that. So in something like Amazon Go, I want that, you put it in your bag, you forget about it. If you're looking at a normal store, you say, I want that, I put it in the cart, and then I reconsider. And I think we've all done this, sort of hide boxes that we no longer want in other parts of the supermarket, and hopefully people will find them. But what's interesting is it's going to drive more purchase in store. It's going to provide an opportunity for dynamic pricing of everything from like vegetables to protein and beyond. And this is going to get rolled out in the majority of the Whole Foods stores, which is at scale, which is to, you know, the wealthiest populace in the United States as well. So there's going to be a change of dynamics here, especially when you start to understand behavioral patterns of consumers. It could be very useful for us in the agricultural industry. Let's just hope that Amazon maybe open the doors to be able to share some of the insights. But what's really interesting and what's happened, certainly accelerated by the pandemic, is the appearance and the acceleration of the prepared meal food boxes as well. Meal kit, ready to cook delivery services is now valued at 10.26 billion in 2020. It's going to see a huge growth of about 13% year on year up until 2028. And if you can imagine, they're going to literally be buying new customers. And if they can start to gather more subscription and more customers, that's going to give them a lot of purchasing power from, you know, fruits, vegetables, protein supply as well. Another accelerant has been food delivery at home, and Toronto was the most shut down city in North America during the pandemic. And we've certainly relied a lot on this, and it shifted my behavior to be able to order food. But ghost kitchens are going to be a huge change in the quick service restaurant food delivery restaurant world as well. Ghost kitchens are very large areas, could be warehouses with hundreds of different kinds of restaurants within them. In fact, one restaurant or restaurant operations owner could run, you know, a dozen different restaurants virtually through ghost kitchens. And in fact, it's this that's getting really exciting and also very worrying for a lot of people out there in the restaurant industry right now, is that these kinds of operations could be a huge industry. So Euromonitor thinks it's going to be $1 trillion global market by 2030. This is hugely disruptive as we look forward. In fact, you know, it could disrupt drive-through services, takeaway, ready meals like we've spoken about, packaged cooking ingredients, dine-in food service, packaged snacks. If it reaches that size as an industry, imagine the power that they have over supply chains of food, and the prices that they pay is something that I sort of say that we need to start thinking about today. Then many of you online now might know who this is. This is Jimmy. He's also known as Mr. Beast. He's one of the largest YouTube creators online. He's only 23. He's got over 91 million subscribers, makes over $75 million a year. And last year, he launched the Mr. Beast Burger in over 1,000 operations in North America and in Europe. Very, very quickly. So we're seeing a huge amount of disruption in these areas. It's kind of exciting. It's also kind of scary. He's actually a fantastic guy. So do watch him. But we're seeing more of this influence coming in. So see what social media is going to be doing out there to influence how the agriculture and agri-food industry works as well. So what if consumer food supply shifts? There's ghost kitchen hypergrowth, supply brokerage agreements between them and the food providers and the consumers. And then they look at profit optimization for consumer facing operators as well. That profit optimization is something that I saw with my father, having worked in the dairy industry as a dairy wholesaler for over 30 years, always getting squeezed. Now imagine when you got people like Travis Kalanick, who runs one of the largest ghost kitchen operators, who used to run Uber, like squeezing the entire industry. What happens when Amazon does the same? It's going to be very, very interesting times. And we're going to have to stand together as an industry in agriculture to say, okay, this is how we play. This is the value we provide. And this is how we can work with you. So we've spoken a lot about data, connections, changing industries, you know, and all of this is an ecosystem based in technology. So we have to consider secure operations, and privacy of data as well. And the industry of agriculture, as it gets more connected and there are more sensors, robotics, and whatever out there in the fields and within, vertical farming operations, we have to understand that we're going to be exposed to cyber attacks as well. This is a really interesting case study here that was provided by this group called SIC Codes to the DEF CON conference a couple of years ago. DEF CON conference is a global meeting of the world's best hackers, but like they actually hacked, a group of them managed to hack the American food supply using a lot of John Deere systems. It's a video, it's about 30 minutes. Do go and watch this. I'll be sharing these slides after the talk as well, so you'll be able to go and find it. But it's interesting. There's vulnerability in the agriculture industry, and we've certainly seen that. In fact, last year, JBS, a huge supplier of protein, had to pay ransomware hackers $11 million to get their systems back. And we're actually seeing a huge amount of vulnerability predicted and potentially over 50,000 security disasters waiting to happen. I was at a conference and I asked the 120 farmers in the audience who had cybersecurity staff on their, actually employed full time, and none of them did. In fact, many of them never really worked with these people. We're going to have to step up and we're going to have to do that. But with the growth in biological knowledge and the computing power and the data collection and exploitation, these three dimensions of data and computing power within the agricultural world, we're going to see exponential exposure, and we're going to have to do something about it. But the weakest part of security within our farming operations are our networks and psychological effects. By that, I mean people. So we have to train people not only to use very difficult passwords, and if your passwords aren't at least 14 to 16 characters long and very complicated, you should be worried about being compromised on a personal level. You should also consider, the people that are trying to con you and coerce you and social engineer information out of you about farming operations. So what if we underestimate the risk of cyber attacks on our businesses? What if we do employ cybersecurity specialists as part of our core operations, something that's vitally important going forward? And what if we invest in cyber attack insurance? And it's definitely out there. Okay, moving on and thinking about resiliency. So resiliency to me is ensuring that we start to address some of the challenges we've got around waste, around the circular economy and the such like. The first thing that I sort of draw people towards to say, hey, take a look at this, is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I work with the United Nations framework on climate change, but these UN SDGs sort of help you go down deeper into understanding how you can apply some of these to your business. It's actually really, really good business. There are businesses out there that can align profits directly to the adoption of these different principles. There's also the circular economy. So taking things that we produce on the farmer's waste and reusing them as well, maybe within the economy and with partners. I've seen people use everything from mash, from brewing beer to then grow mushrooms, all the way from, like I said earlier, anaerobic digesters taking waste food and producing methane. It's an exciting world. Circular economy is going to be something that we're going to have to focus on. It's going to have to be something that the agricultural industry really starts to get very, very good at. In fact, we've kind of got a waste problem in the world. We're going to see about 3.4 billion tons of solid municipal waste generated by 2050. And of the same waste, about a third of that is not managed in an environmental manner. In North America, the largest amount of waste we have within city context is food waste as well. So we have to understand what we can do there. And part of the waste problem we've got is plastics or novel entities, as it's seen by the planetary boundaries framework here. 80% of all plastics ever produced remain in the environment. In fact, it's got twice the mass of all living mammals on the planet. There's a problem, and we need to do something about this. Yes, there are new ways of thinking about plastic offset credits and whatever, but it's kind of starting to be gamified a little bit and used as greenwashing by a lot of companies. But at the same time, there are fantastic companies like Footprint that are stepping up And they're saying, okay, we can use plant-based boxes and start to think about how we can revolutionize packaging that's not only biodegradable, but can be used again and again. I like to think about indigenous thinking as well when I think about this. Indigenous populations survived for thousands of years before colonization, and they've operated for a very, very long period of time. They think that this idea came from about the 11th century by the Iroquois, the seventh generation principle. So whatever we do today resonates through 7 generations ahead of us, about 260 to 180 years. So it's interesting to think about, what if we planned our businesses in the long term? And as a futurist, this excites me to start thinking about, okay, we can't just produce waste and know that suddenly we'll just dig it into the ground and it will disappear. What if we do something that's more impactful? It's not easy to really address the sustainability, circular economy, and these development goals, but we have to start. So what if we formulate sustainability and circular first operations? What if agriculture and consumer packaged goods businesses joined forces to aim for zero plastic waste? I think now is the time to do that. So as I sort of wrap up the presentation, we find ourselves in a particularly interesting place in the world. Excuse me. We're in this sort of liminal state of post-normalcy where we've got the history of how we got to today and all of the hard work that came from our relatives and the legacy of the agricultural industry. And then we've got this bright, amazing, possible future ahead of us. But we're in this little state of post-normality where we don't know what's happening and what's going to help us to get there and how we're going to come together to think our way through this. But when we start to explore our unknown futures, we can consider cultural shifts, build bigger vision, strengthen strategic planning, and anticipate risks today. And this is the core of my business, is working with people to explore the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns, the things that we could never predict were going to come. So, looking at principles, what good principles are we going to establish for us as a business, like humans first, sustainability and such like? Finding those signals and trends, very much like we did in this presentation. And every engagement I do has got this kind of work in it. What if we start to build out some more complex stories and scenarios? What if scenarios? What if in the year 2040, we employ renewable energy and cellular protein supply, and we can build stories around that. And then we can build speculative futures. These could be illustrations, they could be books, they could be short stories. And then what if we consider all of them across the things that we need to run our businesses? So the dimensions of financial operations, organizational considerations, regulations, culture, environment, political considerations, technology, and even societal and social elements as well. And we can start to look out what we need to build, and then from those futures, backcast and take evidence of how the world's going to change. Now, about 3 or 4 years ago, I worked with YVR Airport in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I worked with them and they said, okay, we need a vision for the world in 2037. Every 10 years, there's a 20-year planning cycle. And it's typical for most airports across the world. And they said, how can we inspire people in British Columbia and in Vancouver to get involved in the conversation about our futures and to shape it in a new way? And I said, okay, leave it with me. After about 3 or 4 weeks, I came back with 5 science fiction stories that told these raw, visceral visions of what the world would look like in 2037. And here's a short video that promoted that and really generated a lot of interest.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
So myself and the CEO president of YVR Airport, we did a big media tour, and we planned to have 5 sessions with people, and they booked out immediately. In fact, those 5 sessions became 12 sessions, and we were just going to do Vancouver, and then we had to include 3 other cities in Greater Vancouver metro region. So this became a huge success. and the visions of what the futures could be for this particular operations was really ignited, and it came from people that got involved. So think about this in the agriculture industry. Maybe like the consumers, the partners, the supermarkets, everyone can get together to start to work out what our futures are. What's fascinating about this was, like, just in the last couple of years, they actually implemented this glassed-in island forest with access to the outside, which is almost exactly the same as the in-terminal vertical farm that I imagined as part of my science fiction stories. Whilst it's not growing food there right now, it possibly could in the future. But this is so inspirational to me to think about, okay, how some of these bright ideas of creative, curious sort of explorations of our futures can actually become real things. And that's it with this keynote. This is about helping you shift your mindset from what is to what if. And what if the world could be different? What if we can challenge the way that we work? What if we can continue to create resilient agricultural and agribusiness operations? And what if, the things that established society at large 10,000 years ago, agricultural food supply at scale, can actually go forward and meet the demands of a population growth around the world? And it's interesting to me. I was chatting to Renee earlier and said, I'm so excited about speaking to you all. I'm so excited about the agricultural industry, because this is the thing that's meant that we've been able to grow society and be here today. And I think that all of you online are going to be part of the solutions and the big thinking about our futures going forward. And I think that we've got a new paradigm of thinking that I call infinite humanity. And yes, we're still going to have exponential information. We're going to have self-driving transportation, artificial intelligence behind that. We're also going to have renewable energy, but I think biology is going to play a huge role. But I also think that having a huge worldview is one of the most important dimensions that we can have. It's these 5 things that interplay that create a new vision of how the world works. And my book actually goes into this in some depth. And that's it. Agricultural futures. Where are we going to go, and what's likely going to happen? I'm going to stop sharing. I very much look forward to an exciting Q&A. So please do share your thoughts in the chat. Thank you so much.